Hi, everybody. My name is Toni and Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. So I have as you know, my favorite always guests are the authors, and I have author Jay with me today. I'm very excited. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, everyone.
So the reason I chased you to get you on the podcast is I'm sort of into historical fiction. I like to say my literary fiction's really my favorite, so I'm a bit of a snob sometimes when it comes to my reading, but I read everything but for science fiction. So I'm diverse in what I read. I really enjoy historical fiction a lot. And somebody recommended to me your book, Backwards to Oregon. So I picked it up and read it, and it is so unbelievably good. Right? It was a really, really interesting read. Sure, there's the romance factor, that really is the compelling force, I guess, in that book. But um, there's so much more to it, right? It's so multi-layered what you did with that book, and that's one of the reasons I was so interested in talking to you. Um, you literally zone in on this time, historically speaking, that's very undercaptured in literature, right?
Mhm.
This time in the United, and which was interesting to me too, because when I did a little research on you, you live in Germany,
Mhm.
right? So, and you focus on this really underperforming period in American history. So I think I'm going to start there and say, what made you focus on it?
Well, I'm a history buff and I was always interested in history. And you know the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. Like German history, I grew up with that in school and that wasn't interested to me because I felt like, yeah, I know that already. And I call myself an information junkie. I like doing research and learning new things. And so I had this idea of writing a historical fiction, starting with the idea of Luke, who is very interesting. Luke's gender identity is very unusual for that time, or we think it is. It wasn't actually. In that she is assigned female at birth. So physically, she's a woman, but she's living the life of a man, but she's not quite a man. She's kind of, she says in the book, she's stuck somewhere between these two worlds. So I feel like nowadays she would probably identify as non-binary. Um, and I got the idea when I first discovered all the women who had served in the US Civil War. So my first idea was I want to write about a character like that, but I already was aware of several sapphic romances that were set during the Civil War, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted something new that hadn't been done yet, and I decided on the Oregon Trail because I wasn't aware of any books with that setting, at least not in the sapphic community. And because the wagon train gave me a setting where these two people can just go their separate ways when they find out each other's secrets. They had to rely on each other and trust each other. And so that's why I picked that setting. Plus, of course, it's a very interesting time.
Sure. So, like, this is the period of time where the West is not developed yet. All right. And people that are living in the East who want a new life, right? Who want a different life.
Mhm.
Certainly the East is at that point their version of cities, right? So it's much more populated. Life is different, right? So people start migrating towards the west to have to do farming and a whole host of reasons why you'd head west. But and over this course of time, they travel in like caravans, where multiple strangers would gather together to make this, months long trip across the country. Now we're definitely spoiled. You hop on a plane, a few hours, you're from one place to the other. People jet around the country where they can be in two and three states, countries, in the same day. But that certainly wasn't true back then. I mean, it was a journey, and so they undertake this where these strangers sort of share this bond across this period of time. I was super interested in that, right? Because I knew about the Oregon Trail, of course, what you learn in history class, about it, but you never really focus on the people, right? And here are these people who don't know each other one day, and the next day are hoping that person will save them, right? If they fall if in the lake or and a lot of that stuff happens. There's all sorts of dangers along this trail. Uh, and I found that, to be really interesting to get into the people like that suddenly went from strangers to this, right? The sharing of such a significant time in their life. And that's that way, I think, in the world. Like you can sometimes go through something, and this is representative of anything. It can be cancer treatment, right? And the nurses are the people that are with you in a hospital during a particular period of time. What is a very small time in the grand scheme of your life is such a significant moment that those memories and those people are with you always, right? And I felt like you definitely captured that, right? The forming of these relationships along the way and these friendships. And I liked that a lot. Like it gave me a true sense. It felt very real and true to the
Mhm.
historical period. So I applaud you on that.
Yeah. I mean, I had an advantage that in my former life, before I gave up my day job to become a full-time writer, I was a psychologist. And people say I write like a psychologist. So
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so that brings something to your creative process then.
yeah.
You really know
Yeah,
how
I
to get
mean,
into the minds of these people.
yeah, I mean, there's an external plot where you have all the adventures that they encounter along the way, but there's also the emotional development that the journey that they each take as people, and they come both with a yeah, I would say heavy backstory. They have both not have the best of experiences with their families, and so they have closed themselves off and only rely on each other, don't trust anyone else, and basically they are both in survival mode. And on this journey, they are really forced to work together to survive. And slowly, bit by bit, they open up to each other, and of course, bringing in Amy, Nora's 3-year-old daughter, that also adds to the mix because she's so innocent, and
Mm.
Luke has never interacted with children before, and that brings an interesting dynamic into.
Sure. So, I mean, for anyone who hasn't read it, just for a little more, I mean, certainly I don't like to give away spoilers. I think you should go buy the book and read it. But really, as Jay indicated, there's a non-binary character who up until this point had been a military hero, right? Fought in the war, and as you indicated, that was true at that time period where some women would dress like men and fight in the war, and it's successfully, right? Where they'd actually make a difference or help. Um, and that's what had happened. I don't know, Luke, I'll just say Luke because, like you
Mhm,
said, he probably would be considered non-binary in today's language. And Luke is a hero, right? From the time in the military. And then he's just looking to survive, right? Just looking to get by and comes across this other character who has really had a hard life in her own way. Got pregnant out of wedlock, comes from a more upscale family, has the scandal of getting pregnant out of wedlock, and the parents just throw her out.
mhm.
And back in those days, it wasn't like, oh, you just go to the shelter and, it's easier. And it's certainly easier to find help today. But back then, there really was nothing, no place to go. And she tries to survive on her own, winds up becoming a prostitute to make ends meet, and then meanwhile has the baby, and so has a little girl. And through a series of interesting, I'll say, scenes, which I won't go into, they wind up meeting. Nothing happens between them, but Luke invites this other character, Nora, to come to marry and go with him, because she certainly believes he's a him when the story starts, to head west, to start a new life. And I think she says somewhere in the book, she kind of jumps onto this opportunity, holds on with both hands. And therein lies all the dynamics to this, right? So now that they're with these other strangers making their way, and also this is a lifeline for her to begin a new life for her and her daughter. Um, and the power of that is pretty significant, isn't it?
Yeah. And they can turn, once they pass a certain point, there is no turning back. Like they have to keep going, doesn't matter what happens. And Nora relies on Luke. In the beginning, she can't even bake bread. She's and so she relies, but she also undergoes her own journey as she becomes more confident and realizes she can contribute things to their partnership. And yeah, so
So it's sweet. It's an awfully sweet romance. Um, and I mean, just historically, I found it to be very historically accurate. And if you like historical fiction, it certainly allows you to step into um, this scenario. You'll feel like you're right there. It's a hard book to put down. It's a very easy read. And these characters are just plain old likable. So I mean, and I think these characters have gone on. You've written other books or a novella, I think, with
mhm.
these same characters. So I think they're wildly popular for you. Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's not my bestseller because a lot of people, or I wouldn't say a lot, but some people who prefer contemporary romances. And I think it might be a higher percentage among LGBTQ readers who shy away from historical fiction. Maybe because they expect, oh, there's tragedy. There's no happy
Yeah.
ending back then for queer people. But of course, it's a romance, so it has a happy ending, and I think it's a realistic happy ending.
Oh
Um,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, and Luke, I would say Luke in particular, but also Nora. I think they are among my most popular characters. Everyone really loves them, and I keep coming back to them too. I wrote a full-length novel that is set 17 years later, that features Luke and Nora, but also their daughter once she's grown. And then a short story collection, a spin-off that features their granddaughter. And the last part I added to the series is a novelette that is set right after the end of Backwards to Oregon.
Yeah, I mean that to me is a popular pair of characters,
Mhm.
right? That there's enough demand for them to continue seeing snippets into their life and into their future. Right? There was just something really very compelling about the chemistry between these
Mhm.
two people that I thought shone through. These are two broken people. I mean, and it's not, and let me say this, it's not necessarily unique to their gender. It wouldn't have mattered if it was heterosexual romance or same-sex romance. It really didn't have any impact for me because this is more about the human condition. These are
Mhm.
two people who are very broken by life, right? Luke's got his own backstory. She's got this somewhat tragic backstory, and life has not necessarily shown either one of them the best that there is to offer. And they find each other at that place of total distrust of the human condition, like of other human beings, and almost wanting to just be very isolated from the world.
Mhm.
And then they kind of find each other and they're forced to open up in certain ways. And like again, to me, it wasn't even unique to the same-sex element of the romance, but the fact that here are these two broken people trying to hold on for dear life, who find something good in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
I liked
Yeah, I
that a
mean,
lot.
yeah. And I think they didn't want, they are very lonely at the heart of everything. They're very lonely, but they thought they needed to shut themselves off. And Luke in particular is so kind and honorable and decent, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's very easy for readers to root for Luke and to want Luke to be loved, you know, and to see Luke find that happy ending.
Let's talk a little about your creative process. I've interviewed a lot of authors, who talk to me about how they come up with their stories, how they write their stories, and some have told me, um, I need to plan it all out. I do a thick outline. I plot for months before I actually put to paper, my story. I know the beginning, I know the ending. And I've had some say, no, I got to sit behind the computer and my fingers just go because these people are in my head and they tell me where they want to go and what they want to say. And I can't write any other way but that. What's your creative process?
Mhm. I'm kind of in between. For me, it always starts with the characters because they are at the heart of everything. And it usually starts with one character where I have a core idea of who they are, and I create the other main character to be a good match. And with good match, I mean someone who has all the parts this character is missing and who can help them grow and become a more complete human being so that they can have their happy ending. Um, and then my second element is research. I do a lot of research for all of my books, not just the historical, but I mean, in particular for this one, I did a lot of research. And I spread a very wide net because it gives me ideas for scenes that have to go into the book.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I do little bits of research while I'm writing, like, okay, what kind of underwear would they be wearing in 1851? But I do most of my research beforehand, and at least half of it will never make it into the book, but it's still there, and I feel that readers can feel it. It's like an iceberg. You can only see the top, but you feel, okay, there's more under the water. And I think readers, it makes the book feel more real to readers. And then I work on the character profiles, especially like the psychology.
Oh,
I
sure.
in
That's
yeah,
got to be interesting, bringing your
yeah,
psychology to the people. You really
yeah,
can get into the mind of the people you're creating.
yeah. I do a lot of prep work, but it's not all plotting. I can't just sit down and write, otherwise I would stare at a blank page. But I can't plot out all the scenes either, because that would feel like restricting to me. So I plot out the major turning points. Of course, I know the ending. I know the character arcs and important milestones along the way, but I also leave some room for the story to develop more organically.
Sure.
So usually I know the details for the first few chapters, but I have learned to trust myself, and I know once I've reached the end of what I have plotted out, then I will know how to continue, because I get to know the characters a little better, and then I know more of how the story will continue, and that way I go through the entire story in in different plotting steps. So not just, I don't just plot once, I plot throughout the whole story.
I mean,
Um,
I think it's super cool that you put that level of research into writing, which not every author does, right? I've read books, even fictionalized books that try to capture, and like you said, could be contemporary, just whatever it is. It could be a courtroom scene, right? It could be anything,
mhm,
and you haven't done the necessary research
yeah.
to know, like, that's how it's not, it would never go down that way. It would never,
Mhm,
and then I find that a little hard to get through for me then, because it's like, all right, well, I get that you've kind of made this all up in your head, but the authenticity really has to be there for me. I think
yeah.
that's what draws me to literary fiction, right? Give me the messy, right? Give me
Mhm,
the multi-generational, messy, just what real life looks like any day. And I'll be there for it. Even in my mysteries, I tend to not like just straight action. adventure mysteries, people are jumping from planes and, it's all excitement every second. You never get to know the people. I don't really like that. I like something where I get to know the people, and I like the story to feel genuinely authentic to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think well, certainly this book that I read for you it was very authentic. I really felt captured in the moment, in the time. And apparently you're doing that level of research for all your books, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And that's what's bringing that authenticity, excitement, is that you're a very popular author. So that has to be coming from, readers looking on and saying that, they feel your stories, like they really
Mm-hmm.
feel connected to the people you are creating. That's high praise, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very grateful to my readers. I work hard on my books, and I'm not a fast writer, partly because I edit while I write. I'm an editor too, so I can't help it. But partly also because I put a lot of time into each of the steps. I put more time than the average author into research, and even into the contemporary romances. Like my last one was a medical romance, and I wanted any reader, even if they're a doctor or a nurse, they should be able to pick it up and say, yes, this feels authentic. Um,
That's interesting. Talk to me about this. So, even for like a medical drama, like you do go into the whole thing. When you start writing your book, is it the romance then that's the driving force for you? Like what's the like yeah, at first I figure out who my couple's going to be and I build their world around it. Is that the driving force? Or is the driving force of your book more like let's them go spend some time in this world?
it's the characters, but who they are as people, like what friends do they have, where do they grow up, what families are they from, what previous relationships did they have, what jobs do they do. That is part of their life, and it makes them who they are as people, and it determines how they will react to each other. So I feel like I can't really separate it. Like my nurse character Ellie in my latest book, she's a nurse, and she had this experience that nurses aren't always respected by doctors, and so that informs how she reacts to the other main character who is a doctor. um, and I feel like my research into the everyday lives, the work lives of nurses and doctors in the ER, informed the plot and informed the character. So I can't really see it separately from each other.
Cool. So I like that a lot. I mean, I
Mhm.
really do like that a lot. I mean, I think um that every author needs to be more mindful of that. Like I think because I think your readers, you meet your readers where they are, right? I mean, let's face it. Most people who read have been doing it their whole lives,
Mhm.
but there are some people that come to it new. But at the end of the day, readers are a little more sophisticated than people give them credit for,
Oh
and
yeah.
I like a book that makes me feel, um, you know, sucked in.
Mhm.
Right, I just do. I like to be sucked into the story such that even when I'm doing something else, I feel the pull back to the book, right? Like I feel like, oh, I want to go join my friends and see what's
Mhm.
going on over there in the book. So I think it's important, authenticity, which is something you hit on here for creativity purposes. I spot on for me. Like, to the extent that you really know what you're talking about, and you create that and you build around these
Mhm.
authentic, uh, whether they be feelings, types of relationships, people, events, n- yeah, all the more to it. Like I like that
Yeah.
authenticity makes it feel real to me. And I like that. I like that real feel. So tell me
Mhm.
about your new novel. What's going on?
Um, well, the last one I published, there's always one that is in the works too. The last one I published is Bachelorette number 12, which
Oh,
is
cool. That's nice, nice.
it's a contemporary sapphic romance set in the ER. And the main characters are a nurse who is more of a sunshiny character, real people person, warm and friendly. And she clashes at work with Regina, who is more of an ice cream doctor, very standoffish and professional, but cool, more icy. And they clash at work all the time and don't really like each other. And then they both attend a singles auction, and Regina is talked into letting herself be auctioned off for a good cause. And by complete accident, Ellie bids on her and has the winning bid. And now she has to go through with it because it's for a good cause, and they have to go on a few dates with each other.
Well, I mean, the premise certainly sounds exciting.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's
Um,
very, like on the surface, it's very different from Backwards to Oregon. But I mean, at the heart of the story is always the romance and how these two people change each other's lives.
oh, well, you know what? I think there's something to that, even with romance, right? Even the romance genre,
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes doesn't do justice to the genre, right? Because I think that even romances, there's something very real about people. I'm an attorney. I did a lot of divorce work in my
Mm-hmm.
day, right? And I see relationships at the very end, when things are just breaking apart. But everybody had a story, right? If I sat down with every single person at the end, they could tell me about the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the times, the beginning was nice, right? Everyone could show me pictures of smiles and, and tell me stories about um, how they fell in love, that draw you in, that are very compelling. And then you kind of realize, like, wow, you're rooting for this couple in this story. And I was most struck by that. And it's one couple, and they really hated each other. And um, it was so volatile and,
Mm-hmm.
palatable to see the anger and the hate between them. And she kind of walked off at one point, and they went to find my client, and she was sitting on a bench outside, and I sat down next to her and I said, because it was so hard to imagine. I was like, I mean, how did she even meet and get
Mm-hmm.
involved? Like, they seemed so different. And she starts telling me the story, and I found myself rooting for them, in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was so romantic, um, and then I'm thinking, you get lost enough in it where at one point I think, I wonder how it ends, and then I realize I've got a front row seat to how it ends,
Yeah.
right? It ends in ruins, absolute ruins around them, and I think, like, that aspect of the world has been around from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Relationships, and the good and the bad, the messy and the people who grow old together, and the people who don't, and that the dynamic opposite of love and hate, right? That's just been around. People loved each other in the 1600s, and they love each other now, and they love their kids back then, and they love their kids
Mm-hmm.
now. And there's just universal truths that I think bind us.
Yeah.
And so I think romance sometimes doesn't do that justice,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much to relationships. Because even at the end, there was probably a pretty nice beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's all about people, and how some people are right for each other and some people aren't, and the crazy ways people behave in relationships. And I think that romance authors don't always get that. Right. And that's one of the things I really fell in love with about your book. You kind of got it, right? You gave it the time and the pacing, for them to believably,
Mm-hmm.
trust and love each other. And And that to me was just half the battle, like I cared about these people, I was rooting for these people. And I think in a romance, it sort of became secondary that this was a romance novel. The conditions of the move, the historical journey that they were taking, and how two human beings can save each other. Um, that was just really compelling, such a lovely story. And I suspect that you're capturing that in all of your novels, just based upon.
I try my best. And I mean, I'm known for writing slow burn romances. So my characters, they don't meet and fall in love and then instant happy ending. It's more of a they slowly get to know each other. And what I'm interested in as a psychologist is that process of showing how people who have a life before they met, and they come with a certain backstory and certain emotional scars, and how they open up to each other and slowly learn to trust and learn to overcome all the old wounds and prejudice and whatever they came with, and slowly it's like therapy. I always say like a romance novel is really like therapy. They overcome some of the burdens from the past in order to be more complete as humans and in order to get their happy ending. And so I think that's the element that all of my books have. Doesn't matter if it's a historical romance or contemporary or paranormal. That's what I'm working on right now. They all have that element of complex human emotions, and two people who slowly change each other's lives for the better.
I love that. Well, you've won me over. Right? I love that. I really do. And that's what draws me to literary fiction. I love complex characters. I think all throughout literature, the finest pieces of literature actually have been, based upon complex characters and complex human emotions. And that's what makes them compelling.
Mhm.
Right? We see something, and it touches us. Deep truth typically is involved that touches us. So the applause. I mean, I'm going to put the links up to your web page, and to your latest book. This is, I mean, she definitely has won me over. If you haven't checked out this author yet, you really need to. It's this book in particular, if you're interested in historical fiction, is a great read. You will not be sorry. It's a perfect 10, really, in every aspect. Um, and her latest novels, I mean, she's converted me. I'm gonna pick up a few more of her books. Um, and I'll put up all the links so you can find her. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope as you continue to write, that you come back and keep talking to me about your
I'd
books.
love that. I'd love that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to close out the podcast. Say thank you for
Okay.
listening or watching or however you're absorbing us here today.